He's sitting on a mountain of wealth, tens of billions to his name. Yet somehow, everyday Americans are the ones picking up the tab. And when he was pressed on this contradiction, he brushed it off by calling basic survival programs budget discipline. What followed, however, was something no one in that room expected. That Thursday morning, the Senate Oversight Chamber carried an unusual tension. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere moments before thunder cracks across the sky. Senators shuffled through their binders, aides leaned in close to whisper last-minute reminders, and the journalists in the back row hovered over their keyboards with the instincts of predators sensing a moment worth pouncing on. Everyone knew something significant was on the horizon, even if they didn't yet know what. At the witness table sat Elon Musk, the wealthiest man alive, appearing exactly as he always did in these settings, detached, casually dressed in a blazer and t-shirt pairing that looked effortless, but was very deliberately crafted to project superiority over the stiff formalities of government protocol. He'd been summoned to address his company's massive federal contracts and his new advisory role on government efficiency, a role many found ironic given that his own empire was built atop some of the largest government subsidies ever granted in the United States. But Musk came prepared with his classic script about innovation, cost-cutting, and trimming programs he claimed were dragging the federal budget down. He'd just concluded a long-winded explanation, arguing that social programs, those keeping low-income Americans fed, housed, and alive, were draining the country's finances and needed what he called discipline. That word hung in the air like a challenge. Discipline. As if struggling families juggling rent, medication, and groceries were simply misbehaving schoolchildren who needed stricter rules. That was when Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned toward her microphone. She had been silent through Musk's testimony, jotting down notes, her expression unreadable. But anyone familiar with her work understood that Crockett's quiet moments were never passive. They were the warning signs. "Mr. Musk," she began, her Texas drawl warm but edged with unmistakable purpose. "Let me be sure I've got your viewpoint correct. You're saying that federal programs that provide food assistance, affordable housing, and essential health care for low-income Americans are examples of wasteful government spending that ought to be cut. Is that right?" Musk nodded confidently, eager to elaborate. "What I'm saying is that we must view government efficiency holistically. We can't keep funding programs that Crockett cut in gently but decisively, slicing through his sentence like a surgeon. Thank you, Mr. Musk. I only asked you to confirm. Do you consider SNAP benefits, Section 8 housing vouchers, and Medicaid forms of wasteful spending that should be reduced or eliminated?" A shift, subtle but noticeable, flickered across Musk's expression. He sensed the trap, yet he had no way around it. "I believe those programs can be run more efficiently. And yes, we should evaluate whether they are the optimal use of taxpayer dollars." "Excellent," Crockett said, reaching for a folder with the confidence of someone about to deploy information no witness wants to confront. "Since we're discussing taxpayer dollars, let's review some of the numbers associated with your companies." What followed would become one of the most talked about moments on C-SPAN. According to federal data, she continued, pulling out the first document, SpaceX has taken in roughly $15.3 billion in government contracts over the last 10 years. Is that correct? Musk nodded again, preparing to defend himself. "Those are payments for services rendered. SpaceX launches satellites, carries cargo to the ISS." Crockett raised her hand subtly. "I'm not questioning the services. I am establishing the totals." She moved on to the next sheet. "Tesla has benefited from approximately $2.4 billion in federal and state subsidies. And customers purchasing your vehicles have collectively received more than $3 billion in EV tax credits. That's $5.4 billion in taxpayer-funded support directly tied to Tesla. Are those figures incorrect?" Musk's jaw tightened. Those incentives exist to promote clean energy. They're available to all EV manufacturers, and once again, I'm not disputing their purpose, Crockett replied coolly. I'm listing the facts, she continued, page after page. Solar City's $497 million in grants and tax incentives. Starlink's $885 million in FCC subsidies, and even more indirect assistance. Federal R&D. Public infrastructure. A publicly educated workforce. When she finally looked up at him, the room had gone silent. In total, your various companies have received well over $10 billion in federal subsidies, contracts, and tax breaks. That estimate does not even include state and local incentives. Now tell me, Mr. Musk, did you call those funds wasteful spending when you accepted them? The question hit him like a blow. He hesitated, calculating. These are investments that yield returns, he said carefully. They create jobs. They push technology forward. So when the government spends billions helping you, Crockett said evenly, that's investment. But when the government spends a fraction of that helping families afford rent and groceries, that's waste. A ripple of reaction moved through the chamber. Senators leaned in. Journalists began typing with renewed urgency. For the first time, Musk's composed veneer cracked slightly. Crockett wasn't finished. She laid out the numbers. SNAP averages about $95 per month, per person, barely $6 a day. Housing vouchers average around $1,200 a month. Medicaid keeps the poorest Americans alive. Then she locked eyes with him. You, Mr. Musk, have a personal net worth hovering around $250 billion. Last month alone, when Tesla stocks surged, you earned $12 billion in a single day. That's more than the entire annual SNAP budget for the state of Texas, which feeds 3.6 million people. She let the weight of that fact sink into the room like a stone dropped into still water. And yet, she continued, you're here arguing that we must cut the programs that keep those people alive. She spoke next about Starship's catastrophic 2023 explosion, how taxpayers footed the environmental cleanup bill, estimated at roughly $150 million. That, she said sharply, you call acceptable R&D, but a single mother receiving $200 in food assistance, that you label waste. Committee members exchanged glances. Some nodded. Musk's irritation was now fully visible. Crockett pressed in harder. You've built your empire with taxpayer assistance. You've benefited tremendously from subsidies, credits, and public investment. And now that you've climbed to the top, your solution is to pull the ladder up behind you. Musk began to protest. Congresswoman, personal wealth and federal budgeting are entirely different things, are they? She asked, eyes unwavering. And with that, reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, because this hearing was no longer turning into the discussion. Musk expected it was turning into an accountability reckoning. Crockett turned to her next point, building her case systematically. Let's talk about the tariffs you've advocated for, Mr. Musk. You've publicly supported tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and solar panels. Those tariffs raise price for American consumers. They make clean energy more expensive. They make vehicles more expensive, but they benefit Tesla because they reduce your competition. She looked up from her notes. So, when you advocate for tariffs that raise costs for ordinary Americans while reducing competition for your companies, is that wasteful spending or is that just policy that benefits billionaires at the expense of working families? Musk's response was defensive. Trade policy is complex. You can't reduce it too. I'm not reducing anything. Mr. Musk, I'm pointing out that you advocate for policies that benefit your bottom line while opposing policies that help families afford food and housing. That's not complexity. That's hypocrisy. The word hung in the air. Several senators looked uncomfortable. Not Buck, his Crockett, was wrong. But Bikosh was right in a way that was uncomfortable to acknowledge. The system was set up to give billions to billionaires while nickel and dimming benefits for poor families. And Musk's testimony had inadvertently highlighted thought reality. Crockett pulled out her final set of documents. Let me share some stories with you, Mr. Musk, because I think we need to ground this discussion in reality. She held up the first letter. This is from Maria Gonzalez in my district. She works 2 jobs. One is a home health aide, one at a grocery store. Between both jobs, she makes about $28,000 a year. She has 3 kids. Her SNAP benefits profit about $450 a month to help feed those kids. Without that assistance, Maria told me she'd have to choose between feeding her children and keeping the lights on. Crockett looked at Musk. You're advocating for cutting Maria's $450 a month in food assistance because of budget discipline. But your companionship received over $10 billion in taxpayer support. Maria pays taxes too. Mr. Musk, every time she buys groceries, she pays sales tax. Every paycheck, she pays payroll tax. Part of her tax dollars went to subsidizing Tesla and SpaceX, and now you want to cut the assistance that keeps her kids fed. She moved to another letter. This is from James Washington, a disabled veteran in Dallas. He receives Medicaid because his service-connected injuries prevent him from working full-time, and he can't afford private insurance. The medications he needs cost about $800 a month. Medicaid covers them. You want to equate Medicaid spending. Should James just stop taking his medications, Mr. Musk? Should he have to choose between treating his disabilities and paying rent? Musk shifted uncomfortably. I'm not saying individual cases don't deserve sympathy. Sympathy, Crockett's voice, rose slightly for the first time. Mr. Musk, these aren't charity cases looking for sympathy. These are American citizens who pay taxes, who work hard, who contribute to society, and who need basic assistance to survive. They're not asking for billions in subsidies like your companies received. They're asking for enough food stamps to feed their kids and enough healthcare coverage to treat their disabilities. She leaned forward, her intensity building. And here's what really gets me, Mr. Musk. You sit there worth $250 billion, having greased over $10 billion in government support, and you have the audacity to call programs that feed hungry children while still spending. You call it budget discipline when what's your releasing is that billionaires deserve over not support, but poor families don't. Crockett pulled out her phone. Anne pulled up a tweet. Let me read something you posted last week. Mr. Musk, government spending is out of control. We need to cut benefits and make people more self-reliant. She looked up at him. You posted that from your phone, probably from one of your multiple mansions, maybe from your private jet, all of which were made possible in part by the billions in government subsidies your companion assist. And you're lecturing poor families about self-reliance. The hypocrisy was now laid bare for every Aneto C. Musk tried to respond. Congresswoman, I've created hundreds of thousands of jobs with billions in government support. And that's fine. Mr. Musk, I'm not saying your company shouldn't trace it, government contracts, or that we shouldn't incentivize clean energy. What I'm saying is you can't take billions in taxpayer money and then turn around and call it wasteful when that same money goes to feed hungry kids or house homeless veterans. She gathered her documents, preparing for her final question. Here's what I want Americans watching this to understand. When billionaires like Mr. Musk talk about government waste, they're not talking about the billions in subsidies going to profitable corporations. They're not talking about the tax loopholes that let wealthy pay lower effective tax rates than school teachers. They're not talking about the government contracts ordered to companies that sometimes fail to deliver. Her voice was strong now, clear, prosecutorial. No. When they talk about government waste, they mean food for hungry children. They mean healthcare for sick people. They mean housing for families living in their cars. That's what they consider waste. Helping people who actually need help instead of enriching people who are already rich. Crockett looked directly at Musk and delivered her final devastating question. So tell Mr. Musk, when did making billions sex kiss letting millions go hungry? When did accumulating more wealth than you could spend in 1,000 lifetimes justify cutting food assistance to families who are struggling to make it through the month? When did your comfort become more important than their survival? The room was absolutely Lana. Musk opened his mouth, closet 8, looked down at his notes, then back up. That's not Euromisa acting. His usual eloquence had completely abandoned him. The man who could command a stage and sell a vision of masculinization couldn't answer a simply moral question about why his billions mattered more than children eating. Crockett didn't wait for him to compose himself. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. But I want to submit for their court the details of Mr. Musk's company as federal subsidies, alongside average benefits received by families in the programs he's advocating cut. I think the comparison will be instructive for the American people. The hearing continued, but everyone knew the moment was over. Within minutes, clips were spreading across every platform. Crockett destroys Musk trended worldwide. The video of her finale question, when did making billions sex kiss letting millions go hungry, watch viewed tens of millions of times. Progressive organizations called it the perfect encapsulation of America's warped priorities. Even some conservative commentators admitted grudgingly that she'd made a point worth considering. Musk predictably took to Twitter later that day to complain that been ambushed and that Crockett didn't understand economics, but had notably never answered her actual question. He never explained why his companies deserved billions while families deserved cuts. He never addressed the fundamental hypocrisies exposed that government spending was only wasteful when it helped poor people. The bigger question remained hanging over American politics. Would tech billionaires ever actually be held accountable for their hypocrisy? Would voters connect the dots between massive subsidies for the wealthy and cuts to programs for the poor? Or would billionaires like Musk continue to receive billions in taxpayer support while lecturing struggling families about self-reliance? Crockett had laid out the facts, exposed the hypocrisy, and asked the question that made millions of Americans think differently about hourly benefits from government spending. Whether that moment of clarity would translate into actual change. Whether the system that enricked billionaires while nickel and diminged poor would actually be reformed again to be seen. But at least now, thanks to 7 minutes of questioning from a congresswoman from Texas, millions of Americans understood exactly what was happening. And that understanding, Crockett believed, was first step toward demanding something better. If this breakdown of Jasmine Crockett exposed the staggering hypocrisy of Elon Musk, criticizing programs for poor families while his companies received over $10 billion in government subsidies, made you rethink how we talk about government spending? Hit that like and subscribe button. Comment below and tell us, do you think tech billionaires will ever be held accountable for this double standard? Share this with anyone one needs to understand that when billionaires talk about cutting government waste, they never mean the billions going to them. Your engagement helps spread the truth. So, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next